to protect people like your little girl from being safe at school?
Well, we homeschool her, but, that's our decision. Some people don't have that option.
We homeschool her. Not any kind of common sense gun regulations that would make people having access to said firearms less likely, like red flag laws, like closing the boyfriend loophole, like understanding that 60% of mass shooters have a history of domestic violence, and stopping those people from being able to have firearms, probably a good idea. The answer is, oh, we homeschool her. We don't even put her in the public school system. If your goal is to stop people from sending their kids to public schools, and also to move state money from funding public schools and instead giving that to private and charter schools where the curriculum is easier to control and are usually right-leaning, the threat of your child being killed by a mass shooter might influence people to give up on public schooling. Also, Ben Shapiro finally said what I predicted was going to be said, even before the piece of shit shot up that Christian school. He advocated for the disarming of all trans people, Ben Shapiro did, which is completely contradictory to his previous comments on the Second Amendment. Of course. Because of course it is. I think this is the truest take on it as well, because this is actually, like, real. Republicans have spent decades fighting against gun regulations by arguing the Holocaust was made possible through mass disarmament of German Jews. They know what they're doing here, and they absolutely do. Like, they are constantly defending the Second Amendment, literally, with this exact argumentation. So if you're simultaneously advocating for the removal of trans people from public life, i.e. the removal of trans people, and you're also advocating disarming them, what next is there? Like, if you understand the argumentation being made here, and then you flip that onto trans people who you've been arguing with as, like, your major platform for the last, like, 2 years, what other conclusion can we possibly draw? There isn't one. The only one is that they want to get rid of trans people. They're going to try to do it by social change, but they've been losing the culture war for a long time. So, what's next? Well, they're going to have to try to do it by force. They're currently trying to do it by force legislatively, by legislating away people's access to medical health care. Because trans people are some of the only minorities out there that require a specific kind of medical health care to exist as the people they want to be. There aren't very many other minorities out there like that. And because of that, they can very easily get rid of said people, at least visibly, by legislating away access to that healthcare, as well as legislating away people's ability to even cross-dress, right? Oh yeah, people with disability, yeah, sure. But I'm talking about, like, religious, ethnic, sexual, gender minorities, all this kind of shit. Like, obviously, conservatives don't think disabled people should be allowed to live. That's been the major plank of almost every fascist government and ideology, is the removal of disabled people, because they see it, that disabled people as a drain on the state or whatever, because state resources are required to help disabled people live fulfilling lives, and that's what state resources should be used for. But yeah, it's abundantly clear what the actual end goal is here. And I don't know, I like to think that the mainstream in this country is kind of waking up to that. Obviously, people like me have been talking about this for many years now. But I like to think that the mainstream is kind of waking up to the fact, like, oh, holy fuck, these Republicans are, like, literally bloodthirsty. Because, like, there's always been, like, that idea, but I don't think it's really been hammered home, because they've been dog whistling so much about black and brown people, about women, and anybody with the capacity to give birth, really. But when it comes to trans people, they seem less interested in dog whistling for some reason. Probably because trans people are literally one of the most minority groups out there, right? It is the smallest possible outgroup you could possibly target of people of minority status. And, they've hitched their entire political wagon to it. And I think, like, people are understanding that the Republicans kind of overplayed their hand. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean anything if no action comes of it in a positive capacity. There is some here and there, but not nearly enough. And it's a lot of people suffering in the southern states especially, and red states. But I think generally speaking, people are waking up. Like, even after a trans person, like in a complete anomaly, actually commits a mass shooting, which is incredibly rare compared to cis people, specifically white men, specifically far-right people when it comes to extremist-related killings, and white supremacists. It seems like a lot of people actually understand that it's not intrinsic to trans identity, that's why that happened. People are realizing that because right-wingers have done this for so long, that Republicans are just using the, oh, but they're trans thing to scapegoat the fact that easy access to firearms is what's causing this, right? I think they're understanding that. Because, like, they've done that since the dawn of time. They're like, oh, yeah, it wasn't the guns, it was mental health care, even though they vote against mental health care access being, increased. Oh, it was, we need to arm teachers, even though, it's a bunch of bullshit and there's not really much evidence to support that would actually be helpful or not. So I think people are understanding that Republicans have no actual real answer to school shootings because they don't seem to care that they happen. And I have a theory, and I'm not the only person who has this theory. And I'd like to talk about it in a more structured capacity in the future, because I feel like it requires a bit more than just off-the-cuff commentary. But, like, Republicans have no real solutions to school shootings. Republicans also don't seem to care too much because all they can offer is thoughts and prayers. They don't actually ever offer anything else that would be helpful. They've also been trying to defund public schools for decades. They've also been trying to replace public schools with private schools and religious schools for decades. If they looked at the data, they would understand that the grand majority of mass shootings in the United States of America, extremist-related killings, are committed by right-wing extremists, the grand majority, and also white supremacists, which are ideologies very close and linked to the Republican Party. So they understand that it is their people that are, the majority of the time, committing these heinous acts. If they understood the data, and I do think they have the capacity to do it, they usually just ignore it, they would understand that, oh, it's our own house. The call is coming from inside the house on this one, Republicans. You might want to do something about that. But they don't. Not only is their inaction provoked by getting money from the NRA and gun manufacturers, the solution of, oh, we got to arm the teachers, and that's how we stop school shootings. You got to arm the teachers so that when a shooting happens, you can use the deaths of children as an alarm bell for the armed teachers to then go and take out the shooter before cops can arrive. That literally just helps the gun manufacturers sell more guns, because now every single school teacher, wherever these policies are implemented, are going to have to be outfitted with weapons and trained in the use of those weapons. It is just another giveaway to the gun lobby. So obviously their inaction is spurred on by the fact that they get money from the gun lobby, and any gun regulations that the majority of Americans support would eat into the profits of the gun lobby. So you can't have that. Not only this, but what is the response then to mass shootings that people have? Well, this is their response.
3 precious little kids lost their lives, and I believe 3 adults, I believe it is. And the shooter, of course, lost their life too. So it's a horrible, horrible situation. And we're not going to fix it.
We're not going to fix it.
Criminals are going to be criminals, and my daddy fought in the Second World War, fought in the Pacific, fought the Japanese, and he told me, he said, buddy, he said, if somebody wants to take you out and doesn't mind losing their life, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do about it.
He actually goes on. Yeah, here we go.
What should be done?
So what else should be done to protect people like your little girl?
To protect people like your little girl from being safe at school.
Well, we homeschool her, but, that's our decision. Some people don't have that option, and frankly, some people don't need to do it. I mean, they don't have to. It just suited our needs much better.
We homeschool her. Not any kind of common sense gun regulations that would make people having access to said firearms less likely, like red flag laws, like closing the boyfriend loophole, like understanding that 60% of mass shooters have a history of domestic violence, and stopping those people from being able to have firearms, probably a good idea. Not like wait times for gun purchases so that spur of the moment can't happen when you go down to your local Walmart, pick up a gun, and then go use it immediately. It gives you time to think about it, because you have to wait. The answer is, oh, we homeschool her. We don't even put her in the public school system. Other people will talk about, oh, well, this is why private schools are better, because it's not as often that you have a shooting at a private school, you have it at a public school. And it seems to me that if you take into the fact that They have no actual policies to help the problem. They get money from the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, and the NRA, which stops them from doing anything because it cuts into the profits of said industry. You understand that, oh, well, what is your solution other than the ones that don't really work, like armed teachers or all this kind of shit? Literally, the response to Nashville by the cops was actually like one of the best possible responses you could have had. I'm not remembering the exact time, but from the time the call was made to the shooter being neutralized was like 10 to 15 minutes. That's 10 to 15 minutes where the shooter has time to go and kill people, right? And that's like the best case scenario, because Uvalde was terrible. Like, everybody was shitting on the cops for Uvalde. And that they took forever because they were scared of the AR-15 that the shooter had. The best case scenario, cops get there in 12-ish minutes, but people are still dead. You have to stop it before it happens, right? But they don't want to do anything to stop it before it happens. And then after that, they're like, oh, well, we can't do anything about this. So then we homeschool them. You send your kid to a private school, even though Nashville was a private school. So that kind of eats into that argument a little bit, I guess. Essentially, they seem to understand that mass shootings are most likely to happen at public schools. Republicans are not big fans of public schools because it is harder for them to control the curriculum in those schools. And they often advocate for people to homeschool their kids or send their kids to private schools where the curriculum is easier to control. It seems like if your goal is to stop people from sending their kids to public schools and also to move state money from funding public schools and instead giving that to private and charter schools where the curriculum is easier to control and are usually right-leaning, the threat of your child being killed by a mass shooter might influence people to give up on public schooling. Because they've understood, Republicans have, that they are not really held to account on their inaction, on their holding up of any policy that might actually help the problem. They've understood that they face no accountability for that. The only accountability that they might face is that they might do worse in elections, but in a lot of, anti-democratic, gerrymandered, and voter-suppressed districts, that's not really a concern. Also, the amount of propaganda that they push to their voters, that's not really a concern. They've understood that they don't really face a lot of accountability for it. They don't have to care about it. So it's like, if we can use the fact that this is going to happen for our other political goals, we don't even have to do anything. We could just not do anything instead and affect that kind of change. That's just a theory that I have. I, personally, think the Republican legislators, the elected representatives, are depraved enough that they see mass shootings as an inevitability, even though they're not. And because of that, they're willing to just fold their hands and do nothing because they might be able to get some kind of a positive out of it. That's just my theory. Because it is helpful for them in dismantling the public schooling system, which, like I say, the curriculum in that system is harder for them to control. They want to control the curriculum in public schools. See also Florida. They want people to send their kids to religious institutions. They want people to homeschool their kids so that you can easily indoctrinate your kid into whatever your ideology is, which in this case is going to be conservatism. What better way to stop people feeling safe about sending their kids to public school then? Also, instability in society makes people more concerned with their own safety and self-defense, and purchasing a firearm for self-defense is a very common thing in America. So instability seems to lead to higher ammo sales, more firearm sales, right? Which is also helpful to the gun lobby, where a lot of these Republicans get their money from. No public schools means us poors will not be able to get good education. Exactly, yes. There's also a class element to it. For a lot of these richer conservatives, they want the population to be dumb. Donald Trump literally said he loved the uneducated because they vote for him. They vote against their best interests, is the subtext that he didn't say there. Republicans understand that a more educated populace is more likely to vote Democratic, which is why they've been trying to defund public schools. They realize that people being normal, well-adjusted, secure, financially, socially, etc., educated, makes for people that are more likely to vote Democrat and not Republican. So the inverse of Republicans need less educated, scared, insecure, financially, socially, etc. people in order to have a voter base. They understand that they're losing the culture war. They understand that they're losing the popular vote. They haven't won a popular vote and still won the presidency. It is all just about power. It's all that it is. If you can indoctrinate kids into your conservative ideology, you make for more likely Republican voters in the future. And if you can't do that, than trying to defund public schools to the point where people are less likely to want to send their kids there, and, you know, just so happen to allow for the threat of mass shootings because of your own inaction in schools, it makes for people less likely to be educated, less likely to be voting Democrat then, and, you know, the wheels keep turning. Oh, and I will say another thing, because the police and police unions are obviously playing both sides of the aisle when it comes to Republicans and Democrats, political instability causing, you know, more mass shootings and Republican inaction causing more mass shootings, it gives police a better justification to be militarized, right? Now, obviously, they won't use the shit that they're given, like in Uvalde, because one person has an AR-15 and they've got 15, 20, 3,000 cops. But it provides the police with the justification of, oh, this is why we need these weapons of war. This is why we need all this funding, right? Like, it would not be easy to justify the outsized amount of money that the police get when it comes to our state budgets if there wasn't a lot of crime. Like, you kind of need a justification to have that many police, that militarize a police force, and doing things to make crime rates go down might run afoul of that. Don't fix the reason for the crime, just add more police. Yeah, exactly, Cassie. And that's the Republican answer. It's also often the Democratic answer, but not as badly, because Democrats largely support a variety of common sense gun regulation and try to push for it. But exactly, like, oh, we need to have armed resource officers in schools to stop school shootings. And then you'll have school shootings. I forget which one it was, but there was a school shooting where there was an armed resource officer there, and he didn't do shit. But hey, you get more funding of the police that way. It was Parkland, yeah. And mind you, it is often public schools that are being met with mass shootings. And a lot of these wealthy fucking dickheads, people like this piece of shit who have the money to be able to homeschool their kids, often will send their kids to private schools, which has a paywall. You have to have money to send your kid to a private school. So they insulate themselves from the negative aspects of their inaction in that way. They insulate themselves from the excesses, the problems that their inaction or oftentimes action creates. Some bullshit. The primary change of having resource officers in schools is more kids get arrested. Yeah, and it tends to be the black kids. It creates what is called the school to prison pipeline. But that's a whole other can of worms. Anyway, there is a perverse incentive for the gun lobby, gun industry, manufacturers, and the NRA to provoke Republican inaction on guns and have them obstruct any change that the majority of Americans support in common sense gun regulation. There is a perverse incentive for them to do so, because a more scared populace is more likely to want to arm themselves in self-defense, which increases sales for the gun industry. Mass shootings tend to happen at public schools, because private schools are usually more insulated, so it makes the prospect of sending your kids to a public school less of a comfortable one, and would potentially make people think more about, oh, well, maybe voting for this guy because he says private schools are safer, this might be the way to go, even though it's not going to be, because you need to have money to go to a private school. All this school choice bullshit from the right is just a way to disempower public schools because they want to be able to control the curriculum, and it's harder to do that in a public school. Republicans realize that unless they can control the minds of the youth, they will no longer have political power into the future, because the younger generations are becoming more and more progressive as time goes on. They are losing voters, hemorrhaging voters, and their most solid voter base is dying off. The boomers. Also, their inaction on COVID took a lot of them out too, unfortunately. Rest in peace. So, what's left? Provoke political instability, make people fearful of their neighbors, weaponizing that fear, weaponizing any tragedies that happen from it, like we're seeing with Ben Shapiro and others trying to push for trans people to be disarmed, an infringement of their Second Amendment rights, because of a single trans mass shooter, even though cis people are overwhelmingly more likely to be mass shooters, and actually being trans makes you less likely to be that. Not only the fact that right-wing extremists are responsible for 75% of 444 total deaths over the last decade. 95% if you include domestic Islamist extremism, because that is also right-wing. But the ADL separates them for reasons. You know, don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. Instead, just disarm a minority group that the Republican Party platform is to eliminate. Makes you wonder what the end goal is there. And it's just power grabs after that. Whatever amount of power you can grab from that, right? Like the Patriot Act, a massive loss of civil liberties and rights of Americans because of 9/11. Just one example. Which actually ended up giving Al-Qaeda a W because it made America less free. Which is like, apparently they hate us because they're freedom. Like, if that's what you think is going on there, then you kind of gave them a W by doing that. It seems likely that the so-called South will rise again is kind of the end goal again, right? Because they talk all the time about, oh, Republicans want a civil war, they want a civil war, they want Civil War II. They're trying to atomize people and split people on party lines as much as possible, utilize states' rights rhetoric in order to make red states as inhospitable to any minority group as possible, which drives people that might otherwise vote Democrat out of those states and make those states even more red over time. You know, the people that can leave that do anyway, and the ones that can't suffer. And it further polarizes the nation, and then eventually you have more and more justifications for the violence that you inevitably want and have always wanted. But like, it's either that or they take over the power and authoritarian capacity using, the judicial branch, like they've been trying to do with the Federalist Society, packing every court at every level with conservative activist judges, top down from the unelected, lifetime appointed motherfuckers on the Supreme Court that give their religious decrees about which minority group is not going to have rights anymore, and essentially just do what Viktor Orban did in Hungary and do a judicial coup of the country and wrest authoritarian power in the United States in that way. That's why Tucker Carlson's also friends with Viktor Orban. That's why Tucker Carlson is friends with Bolsonaro, who also utilized the judicial system to get into power. They're trying to do what Orban did in Hungary in the United States. And if they can't do that, then it's civil war time for them. Which is why conservatives are really, really scared, like I've said before, anytime a minority group starts talking about how they are exercising their Second Amendment rights. Because they are more comfortable in their chances of winning a civil war if they understand that, oh, the libs are voting for disarming themselves, right? If they think that all libs are like scared of guns and want to ban them all, then obviously all the conservatives are going to have all the guns. As soon as a minority group starts arming themselves, like the Black Panthers in the past, like currently queer people and their allies that are showing up to defend queer events from neo-Nazis, white supremacists, the Proud Boys, I repeat myself, that are showing up and trying to intimidate them while open carrying as well often. They really do not like minority groups arming themselves because it kind of dispels that illusion that they have of how easy a civil war might be to win. As soon as they start seeing that, oh, well, that's not actually the case because there are actually lefties out there, usually leftists, that are, quoting Karl Marx about under no pretext. Should the workers be disarmed? Should be frustrated by force if necessary? And then they're like, oh, shit, this might be a bigger can of worms than I thought. So they need to get out in front of that, and that's what Ben Shapiro is trying to do here. What's the way out of this mess? Complete and total political domination of conservative ideology and making it politically irrelevant. That's the main way that it's likely to happen in the current, setting we live in. But that is difficult to achieve. It really just depends on where you're at. Because there are states that are better on this than others. But it seems like defensive voting and direct action in terms of community organizing, mutual aid, seems to be the play. If Republicans succeed in an environment where people feel insecure, atomized, and alienated from their fellow man, feel fearful because of that, then the antidote seems to be the opposite of that, right? Trying to craft a society where people feel less alienated, feel less scared, feel more secure, socially, financially, etc. Leftist policies seem to bring that about. A lot of the economic policy would make people more financially secure, which seems to lead to a lessening of crime. A lot of the leftist policies when it comes to common sense gun regulations would lead to a decrease in mass shootings. Getting to know your neighbors and that community organizing and whatnot, and that mutual aid that you do, allows for people to get to know people that are not like them. That's why cities are more progressive. So getting to know the people around you, trying to provide people with positive engagement with people they are unfamiliar with when it comes to, not sharing a religion or an understanding of gender, can help people become less fearful of the other and more willing to work together. But unfortunately, a lot of this requires a strong Democratic Party, which we do not have. which is why the mutual aid is important, which is why the community organizing is important. Until we can force the Democrats to actually utilize the power that they have to stomp out the malignant tumor that is conservatism out of political relevancy in this country, or move away from the first past the post system and actually allow for third parties to be mathematically viable and then build one of those, which is even harder to do, we're not going to be able to have a lot of movement on this. Oh, and one thing I forgot. It's not just like public schools that mass shootings make people more scared and they feel more uneasy about sending their kids to public school. It's also just any big public gathering, right? Like, you'll probably hear people talk about how people that come to the United States from other countries where mass shootings are not as much of a problem, they'll often be like, oh yeah, these big public gatherings, like, I actually kind of feel worried because of what I've seen on the news, because of what I know about this country. Big public gatherings like marches and parades, events, concerts, shows, all this kind of shit become a little bit more scary, which makes people less likely to want to go out, which further atomizes people and alienates them from the people around them. Who does that end up helping? I've already spelled it out over the course of this entire fucking segment, I guess. The difficulty is that you can't really let that stop you from going out and living your life, because that's what they want, right? They are terror tactics for a reason. But having stronger community bonds, having more of an understanding of your local community and the people in it, having more of an understanding of self-defense and community defense increases the likelihood that these incidents don't happen, ideally. And if they do happen, you're able to come out of it in the most positive capacity as is possible in such a tragedy, right? When you put Islamic terrorism properly in the right-wing category in this graph, then it's 95% of the shootings committed by right-wingers. Yeah, they're separated because the IDL is cringe sometimes, often, even. But the data is good. Reason being, just really quickly, why is because the ADL is, generally speaking, not like the biggest fans of Palestine and carries a lot of water for the nation state of Israel. And it is useful to separate out Islamic extremism because of that. Speaking of, by the way, I recently watched Hassan's video on Netanyahu trying to essentially turn Israel into a dictatorship. It's a really fucking good video, for one. And for two, it's kind of illustrative of everything I've talked about, like in my old videos about the right-wing civil rights ladder dilemma, like the one where we reacted to Innuendo Studios' video on white fascism, even the more recent one where I reacted to the death of a euphemism. What's happening under the right wing, the far right Netanyahu government in Israel. Solidarity to all the progressive left-wing Israelis out there, and of course the Palestinian people. What's happening there with Netanyahu and his far right government is, in a lot of ways, almost a mirror or like a crystal ball into what is potentially possible in the United States of America. Or vice versa. But my brain, my memory is not so good that I can like draw direct comparisons for what I'm talking about right now, unfortunately. And this segment's gone on long enough, even though I don't think this is like necessary to keep in. It's just a good video. Because like, if you understand a lot about what I talk about on my stream when it comes to fascism, and then you watch this video, or like if you've watched Hassan for any amount of time, obviously, because we talk about the same shit, you'll start to notice the pattern. You'll start to notice the similarities.